Something happened inside Buckingham Palace that the public was never supposed to know about. No press release. No royal correspondent briefing. No carefully timed leak to a sympathetic tabloid. Just a quiet, firm refusal, and a room full of palace insiders who suddenly realized the future of the British monarchy had just shifted beneath their feet. Prince William refused to sign the proposal. That sentence sounds simple. It is anything but. Sources close to the Prince of Wales confirmed that when the document arrived, routed through the usual administrative channels, carrying the quiet expectation of royal rubber stamp approval, Prince William read it. Then he read it again. Then he put it down and requested a formal constitutional review before any further discussion would take place. The advisors who had prepared it did not see that coming. The public never saw any of it. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices echoing down marble corridors. That is not how power moves inside institutions that have been perfecting the art of controlled silence for over 1,000 years. It moves quietly. It moves through refusals no one records, through reviews no one announces, through shifts in dynamic that only become visible years later, when you look back and realize that everything changed the moment one man decided not to pick up a pen. What looked like a routine modernization proposal was something else entirely. Because what looked like a routine modernization plan was actually a blueprint to rewrite how royal power communicates forever. To understand why Prince William's refusal was so significant, you first have to understand why the proposal looked so reasonable. Queen Camilla's advisory circle had been watching the media landscape shift for years. The monarchy was under pressure, not from Parliament, not from political opposition, but from something far more unpredictable: the Internet. Social media had dismantled the traditional gatekeeping structures that once protected royal narratives. A single unflattering clip could reach 10 million people before a palace communications officer had time to draft a response. The solution, according to Queen Camilla's team, was professionalization. Centralization. A unified royal communications architecture that would speak with one disciplined voice rather than the patchwork of individual household messaging that had evolved, sometimes chaotically, over decades. On paper it was logical. Royal experts consulted by palace insiders described it as a necessary step toward institutional resilience. Media analysts had been making the same argument for years. The monarchy, they argued, could not afford to operate like a Victorian-era institution in a 21st-century media environment. The proposal was presented as modernization. It was framed as strategic. It arrived with supporting documentation, precedent references, and a timeline that made urgency feel reasonable. Everyone who reviewed it at the surface level nodded along. But buried deep in the proposal was a clause that very few people noticed, and fewer still understood. The clause was not written to be noticed. That, sources close to the palace review process confirm, was the point. Buried within the operational language of the communications proposal was a mechanism that would have transferred final editorial oversight of all royal household messaging to a centralized advisory body, one operating under the direct influence of Queen Camilla's communications team. Think about what that means. It means that the Prince of Wales's charitable initiatives, the dozens of causes Prince William has spent years building institutional credibility around, would have required sign-off from a structure he did not control. It means that Princess Catherine's public health campaigns, launched with careful, independent authority, would have passed through a filter shaped by different priorities. It means that any statement, any public appearance, any messaging from the Wales household would have been subject to review by an oversight body that owed its existence to another branch of the royal family. Historically, the independence of royal households has not been administrative preference. It has been constitutional architecture. Separate households with separate communication structures exist precisely because the monarchy must demonstrate that it is not a unified political apparatus. The appearance of independence is not vanity, it is the foundation upon which public trust in the institution rests. The clause, if signed, would have dismantled that architecture quietly. This wasn't a communications change. It was a power transfer. People watching from the outside might have framed what was happening as family tension. A disagreement between stepmother and stepson. A generational clash over how the monarchy should present itself. That framing is not just incomplete. It is dangerously misleading. The British monarchy's survival across centuries of upheaval, revolution, abdication, war, scandal, has depended on one thing above almost everything else: the perception of political neutrality. The crown does not govern. It does not campaign. It does not advocate. It reigns. And that distinction, however fragile it might look from the outside, is the thread from which the entire institution hangs. Royal experts have documented for decades how carefully each household maintains its messaging independence precisely to avoid the appearance of unified political positioning. When two royal households speak with one coordinated voice on matters of public policy, it stops looking like tradition and starts looking like strategy. And the moment the public reads the monarchy as strategic rather than ceremonial, the foundational trust that justifies its existence begins to erode. This was the risk buried in the proposal. Not family drama. Constitutional exposure. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. And this is the moment Prince William realized the proposal wasn't administrative, it was constitutional. When Prince William requested an external constitutional review, the advisors who had drafted the proposal did not immediately understand what was happening. They had anticipated questions. They had prepared answers. They had built-in revision language designed to address the most obvious objections. What they had not prepared for was a future king who had clearly already thought further ahead than they had. Prince William did not reject the proposal outright. That would have been easy. It also would have been politically clumsy, a visible confrontation that could have been managed, reframed, or leaked selectively to make him look obstructive rather than principled. Instead, he requested external review. Constitutional lawyers. Royal historians with documented expertise in household governance. Independent analysts with no stake in the outcome. Inside the palace, that step was unusual enough to be alarming. Requesting external constitutional review of an internal administrative proposal is not normal palace procedure. It signals that the person making the request does not trust the internal process to produce a neutral verdict. It signals that the request is being escalated, not loudly, not publicly, but decisively, beyond the authority of the people who drafted it. The expectation in the room, sources confirm, had been rubber stamp approval. The report that came back changed the tone of the entire conversation. The external review panel did not mince its language. According to sources familiar with the contents of the report, the findings centered on a single, unavoidable conclusion. Centralizing messaging oversight under any single royal advisory body risked compromising the perceived political neutrality of the monarchy as an institution. Not the family. The institution. The panel identified specific structural risks. A centralized communications architecture, the report noted, would make it functionally impossible for the public, or for independent observers, to distinguish between the positions of one royal household and the coordinated messaging of the monarchy as a political entity. In a media environment already primed to interpret royal statements through a partisan lens, that ambiguity was not theoretical. It was an accelerant. The report also raised a generational dimension that could not be ignored. Trust in the monarchy, expert analysts confirmed, is not rebuilt quickly once it fractures along lines of perceived political manipulation. The institutions that have survived longest, and the evidence is documented across comparative constitutional history, are the ones that resisted the temptation to consolidate communicative authority when the short-term pressures felt most urgent. Prince William read the report. And suddenly, signing the proposal no longer felt like modernization, it felt like risk. Queen Camilla's advisory team pushed for immediate approval. The timeline they had built the proposal around was already running. External communications partners had been briefed in general terms. Structural elements of the new system had begun quiet preliminary development. The expectation, the working assumption on which all of this rested, was that formal approval would arrive as scheduled. Prince William declined to provide it. This was not an emotional refusal. Sources close to the Prince of Wales are consistent on this point. There was no confrontation, no raised voice, no visible rupture. Prince William operated, as he increasingly does in institutional matters, with the precision of someone who understands that how you decline can be as consequential as the decline itself. He requested parliamentary consultation. That request transformed the entire nature of the disagreement. What had been an internal palace administrative matter, something that could have been resolved, managed, or quietly revised within the household structure, now had the potential to become a matter of constitutional record. The moment parliamentary consultation enters the picture, the conversation cannot be contained within the palace walls. Would you have signed the proposal to modernize the monarchy or protected tradition? Let me know in the comments. And that single request changed the scale of the entire situation overnight. The advisors who had drafted the proposal understood immediately what parliamentary consultation meant. It meant scrutiny. It meant documentation. It meant that a proposal designed to operate quietly, efficiently, and without generating external debate would now be examined by people with no investment in protecting it. The proposal had been built on the assumption of institutional momentum, the reliable tendency of administrative processes to carry themselves forward through sheer accumulated inertia. A request arrives. It is reviewed internally. Minor objections are addressed. Approval follows. The system moves on. Prince William had inserted a mechanism that interrupted that momentum entirely. And inside the advisory structure that had built the proposal, the recognition of what that interruption meant was immediate. Sources confirmed that the tone of internal discussions shifted within days. The certainty that had characterized early-stage briefings gave way to something more cautious. Advisors who had championed the proposal with confidence began asking quieter questions about exposure, about what parliamentary review would surface, about whether the language of the proposal could withstand the level of scrutiny that now appeared inevitable. The answer, it seems, was that it could not. No announcement, no explanation, just silence. The proposal was withdrawn, quietly, without fanfare, without a press statement acknowledging that it had ever existed, without a single royal correspondent being briefed on what had happened and why. That silence was itself a verdict. Institutions that have been operating for centuries understand something that modern organizations often forget. The most effective way to absorb a political defeat is to make it invisible. Not to fight publicly and lose publicly. Not to acknowledge the opposition that forced the retreat. Simply to allow the proposal to disappear from the active agenda as though it had always been provisional. As though the decision not to proceed had been internally generated rather than externally compelled. But power does not disappear when proposals disappear. It relocates. What the withdrawal represented, sources close to the Wales household confirm, was not a temporary setback in an ongoing negotiation. It represented a shift in the internal understanding of where constitutional authority over messaging governance actually resided. The question had been tested. The answer had been given. And the advisory structure that had pushed the proposal understood, without anyone having to say it directly, that certain boundaries had just been defined. If you enjoy deep royal analysis like this, remember to like this video. It helps more people discover the channel. But the real story isn't what was stopped. It's what this reveals about the future. The British monarchy has survived because it understood, across every century in which it was tested, that the institutions which last are not the ones that consolidate power most aggressively. They are the ones that know precisely when not to. Prince William is in his 40s. He has spent 2 decades watching the monarchy absorb the consequences of decisions made under pressure, driven by short-term calculation, and executed without sufficient consideration for what they would look like 10 or 20 years later. He has watched public trust fracture and slowly rebuild. He has watched the institution he is preparing to lead navigate crises that had no clean resolution. What the proposal revealed, and what his response to it demonstrated, is that Prince William is not thinking about the next news cycle. He is thinking about the next generation. The monarchy's survival depends on trust. Trust requires neutrality. And neutrality, in the modern media environment, requires structures that resist the permanent temptation to consolidate. The institutions that have endured the longest are those that protected distributed authority when centralization felt most convenient. Prince William appears to have understood that before the proposal ever reached his desk. He read the document. He requested the review. He declined to sign. And when the pressure came, quiet, strategic, institutional pressure of the kind that has reshaped royal dynamics for generations, he held the line. Not with confrontation. Not with drama. With procedure. With patience. With the kind of long-view thinking that distinguishes a reign from a reaction. The public never saw the proposal. But the future king did. And he chose the long game.